Peter put it very rightly that freedom of movement is fundamentally about morality. We Europeans born in the West have the privilege of being born into a world where we could move freely across Europe and to a large extent across the world. And yet that is a freedom that people who were born in the eastern half of this continent, at least before 1989, didn't enjoy, and indeed the people outside this continent largely don't enjoy. So fundamentally, the most important argument is about morality. It's about how important being able to move is in order to lead a better life, in order to meet the person who you might fall in love with and marry, in order to broaden your horizons and experience the world. It's also something which Europeans are incredibly attached to, even in rich countries. If you ask British people who are very sceptical about the EU and you'd say sceptical about immigration, Eurobarometer polls show that the thing they value most about the EU is freedom of movement, and that's true for most EU countries, not all of them. And the amazing thing is that it's not just morally right and a hugely important personal freedom, it's also economically beneficial. Because often you need to move in order to trade. If you think about it, if you go abroad to be treated by a foreign surgeon, that counts as trade. If the foreign surgeon moves to your country in order to perform operations on you, that's classed as migration. Now people will apply a category difference. Many people will say trade is good, migration less good. Actually, the economic impact of the operations, and indeed the health impact of the operations, is basically identical. And it's true not just for highly skilled workers, but also for those with less skills. As was pointed out on the previous panel, Europe is aging very fast. Indeed, the fastest area of employment growth in Europe is not high tech, it's care for the elderly in all its many manifestations, whether it's healthcare, social care, nurses, assistants, and so on. And these are jobs which people born in the more prosperous western half of Europe don't want to do. Young people today don't want to do jobs like that. So the question is, do you go the Japanese alternative and say, well, let's care for old people with robots? Or do you say, there are people out there who really want to do those jobs and are willing to do them, and isn't it a good thing that they're coming here to do those jobs? And the false distinction between high-skilled migration good and low-skilled migration bad has no basis in economics at all. The third economic argument, which is again almost entirely missing in the economic debate, is how migrants are basically risk takers. It takes, even if you're a refugee fleeing persecution, immense courage and enterprise to uproot yourself and to move to a new place in search of a better life. If you look at the Syrians, most of them get to Jordan or Turkey. They don't come all the way to the EU. And it's true also for people moving purely for economic reasons. And those people who move, who are characterized as potentially welfare scramblers when they arrive, actually are generally hardworking, enterprising people. They are a self-selected minority who have pulled themselves up to move in search of a better life. And you see that in countries where it is easy to start a business, such as the United Kingdom, that newcomers are twice as likely to start a business as people who are born in Britain. And sometimes those businesses are absolutely massive. And you can look in Tech City, which is our tech hub in London. One of the unicorns is a company called TransferWise, which is set up by some Estonians who came there to set up a company which tries to cut out the rip-off bank charges on foreign currency transfers. And that's just one example of many that you can point out. So the economic benefits of freedom of movement are large, they're underestimated, and politicians who very often sing the praises of free trade, or indeed of the single market in goods, shouldn't make a distinction between the free movement of goods and services and the free movement of the people who make those goods and services. Let me answer a slightly different question. I think this issue is much, much bigger than Britain. I think Europe is disintegrating. You've seen that the ongoing Eurozone crisis has fragmented financial flows. It's caused economies to diverge, with some doing badly and others catastrophically. It's destroyed support for the European Union, and it's set Europeans against each other. And then now you have the refugee crisis, which actually in numbers of people is relatively small. But this has led to a further collapse of the European Union, with the Schengen Agreement basically in tatters, border controls reimposed, razor wire fences erected not just on the external borders of the EU, as in between Hungary and Serbia, but the internal borders, as in between Hungary and Croatia. You see that the nationalist and xenophobic parties, which have benefited massively from the economic pain of the Eurozone crisis, now have a new axe to grind with the refugee crisis. And they're in government. I mean, Viktor Orban, what he says, what he does, is not fundamentally compatible with European liberal values. It just isn't. Why is he still in the EPP? Or Robert Fico, he says Slovakia is for Slovaks, not for minorities. Is that compatible with any idea of European values? Why is he still in the PES? I think the threat to Europe is much, much greater than simply David Cameron. Yes, I think Brexit is also, I would say, the final threat. And I think that you're right to say that he might be pushing an open door at a time when Schengen is already in tatters, that carving out exclusions from freedom of movement, there might be more receptiveness to that than potentially before. But I think Brexit is actually just one part of a much bigger, very threatening picture. This is a 5 freedoms project, so I wanted to talk a bit more broadly.